The executive conference room in Palo Alto sat in complete, suffocating silence as board members stared at a single financial audit. In August 2011, Hewlett-Packard had agreed to pay $11.1 billion to acquire Autonomy Corporation, paying an astounding 79% premium over market value. But the celebrated enterprise software giant was built almost entirely on financial smoke. A dark, terrifying realization settled over the room as executives confronted the crushing fact that billions of dollars in enterprise value had vanished into an elaborate corporate illusion. The balance sheets that had justified the massive acquisition vanished practically overnight, leaving behind an unprecedented corporate disaster for Silicon Valley. Just over a year after closing the deal, HP was forced to announce a staggering $8.8 billion write-down, attributing over $5 billion of that total directly to outright accounting improprieties. What was sold to investors as the premier crown jewel of British technology was rapidly revealing itself to be one of the most disastrous corporate acquisitions in modern business history. At the center of this financial empire was Mike Lynch, a brilliant Cambridge-educated mathematician widely celebrated across Europe as the UK's answer to Bill Gates. Having founded Autonomy in 1996, Lynch built the company into a global software powerhouse on the back of its core platform, Intelligent Data Operating Layer, known as IDLE. Lynch claimed this revolutionary algorithmic engine could instantly parse unstructured data like internal emails, transcripts, and video across massive corporate networks. In the tech press and investment prospectuses, Autonomy was treated as an unstoppable juggernaut that commanded premium enterprise pricing. After breaking into the prestigious FTSE 100 index, the company routinely boasted sky-high operating margins near 40%. Its proprietary software was marketed to Wall Street as an absolute necessity for Fortune 500 legal departments and compliance officers desperate to organize their rapidly expanding mountain of unstructured digital records. Yet beneath that glittering public reputation lay an aggressive, high-pressure enterprise sales machine engineered to mask flatlining demand for its core software. Behind closed doors, the executive team was secretly executing a complex scheme to misclassify low-margin hardware sales as high-margin software license revenue. They relied heavily on channel stuffing, improper revenue recognition, and backdated deals to maintain the illusion of seamless double-digit organic growth every single quarter. Inside Hewlett-Packard's headquarters, a profound sense of institutional panic had taken firm hold of senior leadership by early 2011. Chief Executive Leo Apotheker and Board Chairman Raymond Lane watched in horror as the legendary hardware pioneer lost its competitive edge. HP's traditional desktop computer sales were collapsing, while margins in its once lucrative printing division were rapidly withering under intense global pressure and shifting consumer habits. The HP board panicked as agile cloud computing rivals like Salesforce and Amazon Web Services rapidly captured enterprise market share, while HP's traditional hardware margins disintegrated. Directors were desperate for a dramatic, high-profile strategic pivot that could instantly transform HP into an enterprise software powerhouse and restore the company's plummeting standing on Wall Street. They needed a massive acquisition to rewrite their corporate narrative overnight. Driven by an urgent fear of irrelevance, the board fixated on Autonomy as their ultimate digital savior. Despite internal warnings about the exorbitant price tag and limited operational synergies, HP's leadership rushed forward with single-minded focus. They convinced themselves that acquiring Autonomy's high-margin software portfolio would immediately insulate HP from hardware price wars, choosing to ignore obvious operational red flags in favor of a desperate growth narrative. On paper, Autonomy represented the holy grail of corporate finance, consistently reporting balance sheets that appeared almost too good to be true. Quarter after quarter, its public financial disclosures showed skyrocketing software licensing growth that defied the broader global economic slowdown following the 2008 financial crisis. To outside observers, Autonomy seemed to possess an unassailable monopoly over high-margin data analytics. High-margin software licenses represent the ultimate financial engine for publicly traded technology companies, generating predictable, highly profitable recurring revenue that commands massive market multiples. Wall Street analysts routinely award software firms valuations exceeding 10 to 15 times revenue, far above hardware manufacturers. Investors willingly pay top dollar for high-growth software vendors, believing those ultra-lucrative revenues will compound exponentially year after year. To maintain that immaculate high-margin growth narrative for Wall Street, Autonomy's executive team, spearheaded by Chief Financial Officer Sushavan Hussain, relied on aggressive accounting maneuvers that routinely violated regulatory standards. They secretly bought and resold bulk computer hardware at a massive loss, subsequently masking those transactions on balance sheets as pure software revenue to keep their reported profit margins artificially inflated. When corporate leadership is desperate for a silver bullet, fundamental financial scrutiny invariably gives way to reckless, wishful thinking. HP's board and executive team rushed through the due diligence process in a matter of weeks during the summer of 2011. Rather than demanding a rigorous forensic audit of Autonomy's complex revenue streams, decision-makers allowed deal momentum and fear of rival suitors to override basic fiduciary prudence. HP's leadership team was so eager to announce a transformative tech deal that they systematically downplayed critical irregularities embedded in Autonomy's audited accounts. Even when external financial advisors raised questions about sudden, unexplained shifts in Autonomy's cash conversion rates and inventory levels, executive leadership brushed those concerns aside. The board was wholly focused on announcing a dramatic strategic overhaul before their next earnings call. Internal warnings raised by prudent financial analysts and industry peers were quietly ignored during the headlong rush to execute the deal. Earlier that year, rival tech giant Oracle had evaluated Autonomy and abruptly walked away, with Oracle executive leadership privately describing the asking price as absurdly inflated. Yet HP ignored these glaring public signals, choosing instead to trust Autonomy's audited financial figures, without questioning how those figures were generated. Revenue recognition regulations under international financial reporting standards require companies to satisfy rigorous legal conditions before recording incoming funds as earned software revenue. Under these standard accounting rules, a business cannot recognize revenue on software licenses until the software is actually delivered, fully functional, and binding contracts are finalized without undisclosed contingent side agreements or return rights. To manufacture the appearance of uninterrupted software expansion, Autonomy routinely booked long-term licensing contracts and low-margin hardware resale deals up front as immediate high-value software sales. They structured shady transactions with third-party value-added resellers, booking prospective future software fees as upfront revenue today, while agreeing behind the scenes to buy back unsold software inventory if end users failed to materialize. Inside Autonomy's executive offices in Cambridge, sales managers monitored real-time revenue dashboards with growing desperation as quarterly reporting deadlines approached. When legitimate software sales fell short of Wall Street targets, executives executed backdated contracts and arranged circular transactions with friendly vendor partners. Money was shuffled through intermediate companies solely to generate artificial invoice paper trails that masked underlying commercial stagnation. Sales representatives faced relentless operational pressure to close enterprise licensing deals at all costs, creating a toxic organizational culture where short-term accounting entries mattered far more than commercial reality. Representatives who voiced concerns over suspicious contract structures were systematically silenced or terminated. By prioritizing fabricated short-term growth over legal compliance, Autonomy built a financial house of cards destined to collapse the moment HP looked under the hood. Due diligence is a grand corporate phrase for something remarkably simple: opening up the financial toy box and looking carefully inside before you hand over billions in hard cash. When Hewlett-Packard decided to buy the British software firm Autonomy in 2011, executive leadership was in such a frantic, desperate rush to seal the deal that they barely bothered to peek under the lid. Instead of thoroughly inspecting every line of proprietary source code and auditing real customer contracts, Hewlett-Packard's executive board relied heavily on polished pitch decks and slick banker presentations. They allowed their own frantic desire for a high-margin enterprise transformation to replace basic, rigorous corporate investigation, taking glowing growth projections at face value while completely ignoring the troubling reality inside the box. This catastrophic failure to verify fundamental financial reality created an enormous blind spot, leaving an $11 billion acquisition hanging on little more than executive hubris and corporate blind faith. When a board of directors systematically prioritizes speed over fiduciary due diligence, catastrophic miscalculations are no longer just possible, they become practically guaranteed. Yet, inside Hewlett-Packard, not everyone was blinded by the prevailing corporate euphoria. A vigilant internal strategy analyst raised urgent flags after reviewing Autonomy's submitted financial files, pointing out that their stated software revenue growth contained strange irregularities and inexplicable margin patterns that defied basic accounting logic and operational reality. Instead of hitting the brakes and launching an immediate independent forensic review, senior executive leadership actively shut down the internal discussion and instructed the analyst to fall in line. The relentless momentum to finalize the acquisition in August 2011 was moving too fast, and no uncomfortable internal objection was going to be allowed to derail the board's prized narrative. By systematically silencing internal dissent, executive leadership intentionally dismantled their own institutional safety nets. They chose corporate political consensus over uncomfortable accounting truths, leaving the iconic Silicon Valley technology pioneer completely defenseless against the sophisticated financial deception waiting directly ahead in their ambitious multi-billion-dollar acquisition pipeline. Admitting a multi-billion-dollar strategic mistake is a terrifying prospect for high-powered corporate executives. When vast institutional capital and personal reputations are on the line, acknowledging that you bought into an elaborate optical illusion feels like standing completely defenseless in front of a stadium full of furious shareholders, stripped of all authority and credibility. To avoid that unbearable public humiliation, corporate leaders routinely double down on deeply broken choices. The toxic psychological dread of admitting defeat trapped Hewlett-Packard's executive suite in a destructive cycle of stubborn denial, forcing them to push the transaction forward long after the red warning lights were flashing bright crimson across their desks. That willful refusal to confront reality allowed Autonomy's core financial machinery to continue operating completely unchecked behind closed boardroom doors. Their aggressive accounting tricks kept churning uninterrupted, setting the stage for one of the most disastrous corporate collisions and regulatory legal battles in modern enterprise software history. The mechanical core of that deception involved hiding mundane, low-margin computer hardware sales inside ultra-high-margin software accounts. Autonomy routinely bought millions of dollars in standard server hardware and resold them to third parties at a severe loss, secretly categorizing those transactions as pure, high-margin software license revenue to fabricate extraordinary organic growth rates. Every single loss-making hardware trade was masterfully reframed as a breakthrough enterprise software deployment, creating a grand financial illusion that thrilled unsuspecting Wall Street analysts while silently bleeding real cash underneath the surface. It was a massive volume trade designed solely to manufacture the illusion of explosive recurring software growth. This aggressive game of corporate smoke and mirrors depended on stretching established international accounting standards past their absolute breaking point. By intentionally misclassifying routine commercial trades, executive management successfully transformed unprofitable third-party hardware distribution into apparent proof of revolutionary, high-margin enterprise software demand across global markets. At its absolute core, the underlying revenue recognition scheme was surprisingly crude. Imagine boasting to investors that you have $10 in pure profit, when in reality you secretly borrowed $9 of those dollars from a friendly broker and promised to pay them back with heavy interest under the table tomorrow morning. Autonomy routinely recorded distant future contracts, unearned licensing fees, and circular reseller arrangements as immediate, rock-solid current profit. By cycling cash through friendly third-party value-added distributors, they engineered phantom revenue streams that existed only on internal spreadsheets, creating the convincing appearance of a booming hyper-growth enterprise software empire. This intricate web of deceptive accounting tricks converted quiet line items in financial ledgers into lethal instruments of corporate misrepresentation. The manipulated balance sheets successfully deceived major external auditors, global investment bankers, and unsuspecting executive buyers who consistently failed to look beneath the surface of the polished numerical entries. While top executives celebrated record valuations and polished their public profiles, ordinary finance staff carried the crushing emotional burden of the lie. Mid-level accountants sat late into the night at crowded desks in Cambridge and San Francisco, staring at cold coffee cups and fabricated spreadsheets, terrified that asking a single honest question would instantly destroy their careers. They operated under crushing daily pressure from senior management, forced to sign off on financial figures and invoices they knew were fundamentally fraudulent. A toxic corporate culture of intimidation ensured that staying silent was viewed as the only viable path to professional survival in an increasingly hostile and compromised working environment. As the final legal signatures were inked on the purchase agreement in October 2011, the multi-billion-dollar trap was officially sprung, locking in an inevitable collapse that would soon trigger an $8.8 billion write-down and launch a legal civil war lasting over a decade. In October 2011, the monumental acquisition was officially finalized when Hewlett-Packard handed over a staggering $11.1 billion in cash, instantly enriching top executives like founder Mike Lynch and major institutional shareholders. Champagne flowed freely across corporate offices in Palo Alto and Cambridge, celebrating what board members framed as a historic tech union. But the euphoric music faded almost immediately after the final ink dried on the transfer agreements. Just a few months later, the boardroom doors slammed shut and the inner workings of the newly acquired enterprise were opened for deep operational integration under new CEO Meg Whitman. The glowing slide decks, promised enterprise synergies, and aggressive cross-selling projections began to disintegrate in the quiet, empty corridors of the acquired company's European headquarters as reality set in. Once the corporate hood was lifted, incoming Silicon Valley executives realized that this massive multi-billion-dollar cash outlay had purchased an entity that was not actually generating genuine high-margin enterprise software growth. Instead of a high-tech cash engine powered by the proprietary idle search platform, they found an operational structure relying on artificial transactions to sustain its astronomical market valuation. The incoming managers from Hewlett-Packard sat down in quiet conference rooms alongside forensic accountants, opening the actual internal books and digging line by line through millions of pages of raw transaction data, general ledgers, and buried email chains from 2009 through 2011. What they found shattered any lingering hopes of a simple integration hiccup. What foreign forensic auditors uncovered was a meticulously engineered financial labyrinth composed of hidden operational losses, unbilled receivables, and completely fabricated sales contracts. Capital had been routinely routed through covert corporate channels solely to give public markets and credit rating agencies the illusion of booming enterprise software demand when real sales were rapidly stalling. By deliberately masking low-margin hardware resales, including unbranded server units from Dell and Cisco, as lucrative enterprise software licenses, the target company had painted a completely manufactured picture of its underlying profit margins and organic growth trajectory. They were actively booking hardware dumps at massive losses while falsely labeling that capital as pure software revenue. A cold, nauseating reality settled into the stomach of every executive and board member who had blindly trusted the polished investor presentations. They realized they had breached their fundamental fiduciary duty to public shareholders by spending $11.1 billion of corporate capital on an inflated illusion engineered to deceive buyers during preliminary due diligence. That profound corporate embarrassment transformed into pure, burning hostility almost overnight across Silicon Valley boardrooms. The polite handshakes and congratulatory press releases were immediately abandoned, replaced by an urgent corporate drive for complete legal retaliation, internal investigations, and the immediate retention of high-powered criminal defense firms, forensic accounting specialists, and aggressive litigators. This explosive hostility converted what might have otherwise been viewed as a standard, botched corporate acquisition into a historic, multi-jurisdictional legal war spanning courtrooms from the High Court of Justice in London to the United States District Court in San Francisco. Subpoenas were prepared, and regulatory agencies were quietly alerted behind closed doors. In November 2012, Hewlett-Packard stood before global media during a dramatic quarterly earnings call and dropped a massive financial bomb on international financial markets. They publicly announced that their marquee software acquisition was vastly overvalued, burdened by structural operational failures, and utterly riddled with systemic, willful accounting improprieties designed to intentionally mislead independent auditors. They executed a staggering $8.8 billion write-down in a single morning, attributing over $5 billion of that total drop directly to intentional financial misstatements and fraudulent sales practices. Stock prices plummeted instantly by more than 12%, wiping out billions in equity value and severely damaging public pension funds held worldwide. That jaw-dropping $8.8 billion impairment forced the entire global technology sector, along with Wall Street institutions and regulatory agencies, to stop and scrutinize the chaotic debris left in the wake of the deal. It stood as one of the largest corporate write-downs in technology history, sparking immediate regulatory scrutiny on both sides of the Atlantic. Industry analysts began asking a fundamental, razor-sharp question about ultimate responsibility for the catastrophe. Was Mike Lynch a brilliant financial architect who pulled off the ultimate corporate heist by duping an American giant? Or was Hewlett-Packard simply an incompetent buyer suffering extreme remorse and seeking a high-profile scapegoat to cover up gross managerial negligence? This bitter, highly public debate fractured the global tech community, leaving former venture partners, prominent investment bankers like those at Catalyst Partners, and veteran corporate directors viewing one another with profound hostility and deep financial suspicion. Trusted Silicon Valley relationships evaporated as both sides prepared extensively for years of sworn depositions and brutal courtroom cross-examinations. That total breakdown of corporate trust destroyed any lingering possibility of an out-of-court settlement, rendering an exhaustive legal battle in both British and American courtrooms entirely inevitable. Federal law enforcement agencies, including the United States Department of Justice and the British Serious Fraud Office, officially opened formal criminal investigations into the executive leadership team. To truly grasp how this elaborate financial illusion was sustained for years without detection, you have to look closely at the concept of round-tripping capital. It functions like passing a single bill in a continuous circle, where you hand cash to an intermediary partner who hands it right back, while you record it as brand new commercial revenue. Autonomy allegedly funneled millions in cash to third-party distributors and value-added resellers under the guise of buying unrelated hardware, consulting services, or licensing options, on the strict condition that those distributors immediately bought software licenses back from Autonomy. These reciprocal deals created a phantom cycle of capital designed solely to fool external observers. That artificial circulation of capital dramatically inflated reported revenue figures year after year, giving Wall Street analysts and prospective buyers the false impression of explosive market demand when no genuine organic capital was ever entering the business. It was a high-stakes shell game designed to maintain an impossible valuation until an unsuspecting buyer took the bait. Inside Hewlett-Packard, panic ripped through the executive suites as the scale of the financial collapse became undeniable. Following an astronomical $8.8 billion write-down in November 2012, Chief Executive Meg Whitman and the board moved swiftly to purge top leadership, terminating senior executives while corporate directors scrambled to insulate themselves from shareholders furious over breached fiduciary duties. Lawyers were dispatched to file massive civil claims against Mike Lynch in London's High Court of Justice, seeking over $5 billion in damages and initiating one of the most expensive legal wars in tech history. Strategic warfare was no longer waged through product innovation or market acquisition, but across courtroom tables lined with motions, affidavits, and complex jurisdictional filings. This aggressive legal offensive marked a complete institutional pivot for the legacy tech giant, transforming a failed corporate integration into an endless campaign of litigation designed to claw back billions in destroyed value. By scapegoating original founders, corporate leadership hoped to distract institutional investors from their own catastrophic failures during the pre-acquisition due diligence process. Mike Lynch refused to quietly fade into the background or accept the narrative put forward by his American buyers. He stood outside courthouses and before international media cameras, fiercely denying every allegation and framing the entire disaster as a classic case of buyer's remorse executed by a mismanaged conglomerate incapable of integrating complex software. Yet behind closed doors, the reality of an endless legal war settled in with overwhelming weight. The brilliant technologist who once built a multi-billion-dollar enterprise software empire found his daily existence completely consumed by defense strategy, exhaustive e-discovery databases, and endless strategy sessions with high-priced London barristers tucked away in quiet Mayfair consultation rooms. This public crusade to preserve his reputation came at a crushing cost, transforming personal liberty and professional achievement into a permanent state of high-stakes defense. The threat of extradition by the United States Department of Justice loomed overhead, accompanied by asset freezes and the very real specter of spending decades inside a federal prison. An endless legal battle eats away at life in ways that corporate spreadsheets can never capture. Every morning begins under the dark shadow of pending litigation, turning personal time into a relentless cycle of depositions, mock cross-examinations, and constant tactical adjustments alongside defense attorneys, while life outside the courtroom grinds to an absolute halt. Sitting inside quiet conference rooms, surrounded by thousands of archived documents, years slip away silently. Time that could have been spent creating new technologies, funding ventures, or simply living is swallowed whole by the insatiable demands of defense, as a decade of freedom vanishes into row after row of cardboard evidence boxes. As the years dragged on, the conflict evolved from a frantic public relations battle into a methodical excavation of the past, led by elite forensic specialists. Independent auditors and legal investigator teams began digging into historical ledgers from 2009 through 2011, determined to expose every financial anomaly hidden beneath Autonomy's published reports. Forensic accountants were brought in to comb through millions of electronic records, bank statements, and internal corporate correspondence. These financial sleuths painstakingly reconstructed years of hidden transactions to trace every dollar that flowed through the company, cross-referencing subledgers with actual customer receipts to uncover systematic accounting discrepancies across multiple consecutive fiscal quarters. Their investigation exposed the mechanics of the ledger manipulation, pinpointing exact instances where low-margin hardware sales were disguised to fabricate the illusion of pure, high-margin software growth. By secretly buying and reselling generic servers at a loss, management manufactured artificial top-line revenue to satisfy eager Wall Street analysts, expecting continuous 40% margins. The quiet precision of these financial findings stripped away the polished narratives spun during corporate roadshows, leaving only cold numbers that exposed the immense gap between perception and reality. Forensic audits meticulously dismantled the illusion of organic expansion, laying out an unvarnished trail of balance sheet fabrications that no public relations campaign could repair. The scandal raises fundamental questions about how immense wealth and corporate pressure alter the perception of right and wrong. When hundreds of millions of dollars in executive bonuses are on the line, the boundary between clever accounting tricks and outright criminal deception becomes easily blurred inside pressure cooker boardrooms, demanding relentless top-line revenue acceleration. In environments driven by hyper-growth and billionaire valuations, the psychological drive to win at all costs often silences the quiet voice of ethical restraint. Silicon Valley's pervasive fake-it-till-you-make-it ethos convinced leadership that aggressive accounting choices were merely acceptable stepping stones toward securing a massive multi-billion-dollar acquisition payoff from a gullible corporate buyer. This distortion created an atmosphere where rationalizations replaced integrity, leaving an enduring legacy of broken trust, devastated shareholder value, and destroyed professional careers. Finance directors, mid-level accountants, and external advisors were dragged into the fallout, discovering too late that carrying out unethical corporate orders offers zero protection when federal law enforcement arrives. When the civil trial finally opened in London in 2019, secret internal emails were read aloud before a packed courtroom under the direction of Mr. Justice Hildyard. Messages once thought to be private were projected on large monitor screens for the judge, financial journalists, and public observers to analyze line by damning line. Emails between key staff revealed candid conversations about stretching accounting rules to hit quarterly targets, causing visible reactions among court spectators as the internal culture was laid bare. Staff openly joked about creating magic transactions and backdating contracts at midnight to manufacture fake software licensing revenues before trading windows closed. The public reading of those messages shattered any remaining illusions of innocent bookkeeping mistakes, setting the stage for a devastating legal ruling in 2022 that would reverberate across the global technology sector. The High Court's findings proved that corporate fraud cannot be hidden forever behind complex financial structures, clever legal maneuvers, and charismatic leadership. The cold, fluorescent lights of the courtroom offered no warmth to the regular office workers brought in to testify. These were not multi-millionaire executives or celebrated tech pioneers, but mid-level accountants who had spent years sitting at plain gray desks. Years earlier, when management handed down directives to log questionable transactions, these workers faced a terrifying choice between signing off on dubious figures or losing their livelihoods. Now, sitting in the hard witness chair under the unyielding glare of legal scrutiny, the true human cost of corporate deception became painfully clear. Sweat beaded on their foreheads as high-priced attorneys dissected every signature, email, and spreadsheet entry from half a decade prior. Day after day, ordinary staff members had to explain why they followed bad orders and remained quiet while the ledger was being twisted. The overwhelming stress of the scandal had followed them home, destroying peace of mind and tearing families apart long before any official verdict was ever announced. While corporate leaders insulated themselves behind teams of lawyers, the rank-and-file employees carried the immediate emotional weight of the company's reckless ambition. This human fallout highlights how organizational pressure can force ordinary people to become silent accomplices in major financial misdeeds. Accounting standards exist for the same reason traffic signals stand at busy city intersections. Red lights and green lights prevent massive steel trucks from crashing into one another at full speed, keeping the road safe for everyone. In the financial world, strict accounting rules keep corporations honest, so investors, employees, and the public can trust what they see on the balance sheet. When Autonomy chose to ignore those basic rules, it turned off the traffic lights on a crowded financial highway. By blending hardware sales into software revenue and hiding discount losses, the company created a chaotic speedway where a catastrophic multi-billion-dollar crash was completely unavoidable. Disregarding standard accounting protocols may temporarily hide operational weaknesses, but it guarantees a complete system failure once external observers inspect the books. The resulting wreck leaves investors holding empty promises instead of real enterprise value. Almost everyone remembers the panic of hiding a broken cup under the bed as a young child, hoping no one would ever notice the damage. For a brief moment, the secret feels safe, but eventually someone reaches into the dark and finds the sharp, shattered pieces. Corporate misdeeds operate on the exact same principle because financial numbers carry an undeniable memory that cannot be wished away. No matter how many spreadsheets are altered or how many complex deals are structured to disguise losses, the underlying reality eventually rises like a ghost from dusty hard drives. The illusion of permanent success evaporates the moment forensic investigators begin matching actual cash inflows against reported earnings. The inevitable exposure of hidden records broke through years of carefully constructed narrative management. That collapse set the stage for a dramatic showdown between the charismatic storytellers of Silicon Valley and the cold facts of the ledger. Tech founders often act like skilled stage magicians, performing under dazzling spotlights. They construct wonderful stories about revolutionary software that promises to solve every complex problem and transform the future of business. Audiences are so captivated by the spectacular illusion that nobody wants to look inside the magician's top hat or check behind the velvet curtain. Investors and corporate buyers eagerly embraced the spell because everyone wanted to believe in the effortless power of the next digital miracle. Asking tough questions felt like ruining a wonderful show, so key decision-makers simply smiled, applauded, and handed over billions of dollars without ever inspecting the mechanism driving the trick. Once the stage lights faded, the enchanting illusion collapsed into a stark courtroom battle where charm could no longer alter the financial records. The narrative shifted abruptly from visionary promises to hard evidence in a court of law. Inside the High Court in London, Mike Lynch spent 20 grueling days standing in the witness box under intense cross-examination. Sharp-tongued barristers fired relentless streams of questions at him from morning until evening, dissecting every email and internal financial memo. Sweat poured down his neck as he fought to defend his reputation under the heavy gaze of the presiding judge. Throughout the grueling questioning, Lynch insisted that he was a big-picture visionary leader, rather than a detailed accountant tracking daily receipts. He argued that he relied entirely on his financial team and top auditing firms, maintaining that he had never ordered anyone to inflate figures or mislead prospective buyers. His lengthy testimony laid bare the growing divide between executive oversight and daily operational accounting. This defense, however, was about to be tested against two very different legal systems operating on opposite sides of the Atlantic. The legal battles in the United Kingdom and the United States operated under fundamentally different rules and stakes. In London, the litigation was a civil trial focused on financial restitution, where Hewlett-Packard fought to recover billions of dollars in lost corporate assets. The UK court evaluated liability based on the balance of probabilities to determine who owed money for the failed transaction. Across the Atlantic Ocean, American federal prosecutors were preparing a far more serious criminal indictment. In the United States criminal system, the government needed to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, with potential penalties including long federal prison sentences rather than simple monetary damages. This dual-track legal struggle pushed the controversy out of corporate boardrooms and directly into the global public eye. As the civil judge in London prepared his final ruling, the threat of extradition to face American criminal charges hung heavily over the tech founder's future. In 2022, Mr. Justice Hildyard delivered a devastating 500-page judgment in London's High Court that shattered the defense. The air in the courtroom felt heavy as the judge formally declared that Autonomy had systematically cheated and tricked Hewlett-Packard. The civil court confirmed that executives engaged in deliberate accounting maneuvers, leaving the iconic technology pioneer saddled with catastrophic losses following its $11 billion acquisition. The civil court found that the British software company had deliberately inflated its true value through hidden accounting tricks and undisclosed hardware sales. It was a crushing blow for founder Mike Lynch, proving that the multi-billion-dollar corporate dream was largely built on smoke and mirrors. By masking stagnant software growth with loss-making hardware deals, the firm artificially inflated its organic EBITDA to satisfy Wall Street expectations. That civil verdict proved that fancy corporate presentations, glossed over pitch decks, and aggressive investor relations could never withstand hard judicial scrutiny. Forensic accountants painstakingly unraveled years of manipulated general ledgers, showing that polished executive narratives crumble when exposed to raw audit trails. When federal investigators examine primary source accounting records, the persuasive illusion of hyper-growth software valuations vanishes almost overnight, exposing raw corporate greed. To spend 30 years building a global business empire, only to hear a high court judge brand your life's work as a massive lie, is a profound human tragedy. The pride of a storied career, built from Cambridge research labs to international boardrooms, dissolved into public shame within moments. Decades of reputation, influence, and corporate prestige vanished under the weight of formal judicial findings. Every prestigious award, every political advisory role, and every commercial victory were suddenly re-examined through the unforgiving lens of calculated deceit. The emotional weight of watching your entire life's legacy officially labeled as an elaborate fraud by federal authorities is a psychological sentence all its own. Former peers distance themselves, industry honors turn toxic, and an esteemed pioneer becomes framed as a master manipulator. That crushing civil loss in London merely set the stage for an even harsher confrontation across the Atlantic Ocean. British civil liability quickly transformed into a relentless American criminal prosecution as the United States Department of Justice formally sought extradition to hold the chief executive accountable under federal law. The battle moved from financial damages to the terrifying realm of federal prison sentences. In May 2023, Mike Lynch was placed on an airplane bound for San Francisco under federal escort to face criminal indictments. Upon arrival, an iron tracking band was clamped onto his ankle, marking a stark and humiliating fall from grace. He traded his independence for a stringent $4 million bail package, bound by round-the-clock armed security surveillance in Northern California. He went from living in a grand English country estate to being kept under strict lock and guard in a rented Pacific Heights residence. The sudden loss of personal freedom turned a high-stakes corporate disaster into a terrifying individual ordeal. Private security personnel paid out of pocket monitored his every move, ensuring total compliance with court orders while awaiting trial in a federal courthouse. Landing in California permanently changed the battle from corporate money and public reputation to pure personal liberty. The stakes were no longer settled through civil settlement negotiations or balance sheet write-downs. They were measured in decades of federal incarceration. In the eyes of the United States justice system, board seats and billionaire status granted zero immunity from strict criminal accountability. American prosecutors formally charged him with 16 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy, terms that sound legally complex but carry a simple core meaning. Prosecutors alleged that he utilized interstate phone calls, emails, and financial bank wires to project a false narrative of enterprise software growth, convincing institutional investors to hand over billions based on manufactured financial statements. The government worked relentlessly to prove that every false invoice, backdated reseller contract, and hidden hardware deal was part of an organized effort to deceive buyers. In simple terms, prosecutors argued that the entire high-tech success story was just a sophisticated scheme to steal billions from unsuspecting shareholders. Internal communications were brought forward to demonstrate calculated knowledge at the highest executive level. With each federal wire fraud charge carrying potential prison time of up to 20 years, the courtroom became a desperate fight for the rest of his natural life. For a 58-year-old executive, cumulative statutory sentences represented a potential life term in federal custody. The courtroom was no longer an arena for corporate deal-making, but a battleground where survival was measured sentence by sentence. Inside Federal District Judge Charles Breyer's San Francisco courtroom, a strange and heavy silence filled the room. Outside, the modern tech world of Silicon Valley kept moving at breakneck speed, generating billions in fresh venture capital, but inside, time seemed to stand completely still. The hyperactive machinery of the global tech economy paused at the door, replaced by formal federal court procedure. Jurors sat quietly in their chairs, staring at dusty financial spreadsheets and complex revenue recognition guidelines projected onto massive screens. A man's fundamental freedom rested not on dramatic opening statements or charismatic speeches, but on dull numbers, email metadata, and accounting ledgers displayed on a wall. Every line item became evidence of either innocent managerial oversight or intentional corporate fraud. That quiet, unrelenting tension in the courtroom made every second feel like an eternity for everyone involved. Weeks of grueling technical testimony from forensic auditors, former finance managers, and industry experts laid bare the intricate inner mechanics of corporate reporting. The trial moved forward with methodical precision, turning balance sheet mechanics into the decisive factor determining a high-profile defendant's physical future. Finally, Mike Lynch took the witness stand in his own defense to fight for his life and personal freedom. Looking directly at 12 ordinary California citizens seated in the jury box, he spoke in a soft, steady, and measured voice. Taking the stand was a massive legal gamble, exposing the chief executive to brutal cross-examination by veteran federal prosecutors. He told the jury that he was a visionary tech leader focused on big ideas and complex algorithms, not an accountant checking every line item. He insisted that he trusted his finance team implicitly and never intended to mislead anyone regarding the underlying health of his company. He framed the revenue discrepancies as accounting disputes rather than deliberate federal crimes. His words on the stand were his ultimate defense against a federal justice system determined to send him to prison. By directly addressing the jury, he bet everything on his personal credibility, attempting to bridge the gap between high-level executive optimism and alleged criminal intent. It was the final desperate gambit of an empire builder fighting to salvage his freedom. The heavy wooden doors of the federal courtroom clicked shut as the 12 jury members walked into a private room to decide the outcome. Outside in the quiet marble hallway, Mike Lynch waited in silence, holding his wife's hand tightly while attorneys shuffled through paperwork nearby. Every single tick of the clock echoed down the long corridor, stretching each second into what felt like an endless hour. His heart pounded hard against his ribs like a bird trapped inside a cage, waiting for the word that would either save him or strip away his freedom forever. Air inside the waiting area felt thin and still, heavy with years of built-up pressure and secret fears. Lynch stared at the dull, polished floor while shadows moved across the glass doors at the end of the hall. Friends and legal advisors stood in small groups nearby, speaking only in soft whispers so as not to break the tense quiet. The long legal fight had come down to this single room, where 12 strangers held the power to change everything in a single moment. While the jury debated behind locked doors, the case had already proven how easily big corporate checks can mask deep internal failures. When Hewlett-Packard signed the contract years earlier, their leadership failed to trace the real flow of cash through every account. That single oversight allowed billions of dollars to vanish into thin air before anyone raised an alarm. Now, legal teams across Silicon Valley had to rewrite their own rulebooks to make sure audit teams would never skip basic checks again. This $11 billion collapse became the most famous cautionary tale in modern business history. Corporate leaders around the world realized that buying a tech company requires far more than looking at polished slide decks and smooth presentations. You have to open every storage unit, inspect every bill, and question every single line item on the balance sheet. Rushing a deal just to beat a rival firm opens the door to total financial disaster. Boardrooms across America shifted their entire approach to buying new startups after the court records became public. Investors began demanding independent accounting audits before signing any big check, no matter how famous or powerful the founder seemed to be. Blind trust was replaced by cold, hard verification, forcing young tech companies to prove their numbers before claiming massive valuations. The era of taking pitch decks at face value was officially brought to an end. The fallout transformed corporate compliance rules across the entire global tech market. Major exchange regulators updated their oversight rules to force publicly traded firms to reveal hidden software resale deals immediately. Financial auditors who once signed off on creative sales numbers were suddenly faced with strict new legal liabilities and heavy fines. These structural changes permanently tightened the definition of legitimate revenue for software companies worldwide. Treasury departments and risk management committees instituted mandatory secondary reviews for any acquisition over $100 million. Deals could no longer be pushed through on the reputation of a celebrity founder or the promise of secret software algorithms. Every contract had to show verified end-user cash payments, ending the widespread use of artificial hardware sales to boost valuation figures. Beyond the legal battles and systemic updates, the personal damage to ordinary employees was deep and permanent. Hundreds of engineers and administrative staff who worked long hours at Autonomy saw their careers tarnished by association. Many lost their pension savings and faced years of uncomfortable questions during job interviews, bearing the silent burden of a scandal they had no part in creating. For the junior accountants who had raised quiet flags in dark break rooms years earlier, the personal toll was equally heavy. Many left the tech industry entirely, weary of corporate pressures that pushed workers to stay quiet about obvious wrongdoings. Their lives were forever altered by the uncomfortable realization that standing up for the truth inside a giant corporate machine often carries a steep personal cost. In June 2024, when the final verdicts were read in San Francisco, the decision resonated across the global business landscape. The ruling shattered long-held assumptions that big corporate buyers could blame founders entirely for their own sloppy due diligence. Wall Street analysts began downgrading firms that relied heavily on aggressive corporate acquisitions, signaling a major shift in how market growth was evaluated. The legal precedent reshaped how international extraditions and white-collar fraud cases are handled between the United Kingdom and the United States. Federal prosecutors realized that pursuing foreign tech executives required years of costly legal battles and massive amounts of physical evidence. This harsh reality forced regulatory agencies to focus on early prevention rather than trying to clean up wreckage a decade later. Yet, a quiet, unresolved question remains at the center of this long corporate tragedy. How could dozens of highly paid executives, auditors, and board members look directly at red flags for years without taking action? The court records reveal the mechanics of the accounting tricks, but they cannot explain the collective blind spot that allowed such obvious warnings to be ignored for so long. People still debate whether the collapse was driven by deliberate deception or by a shared desire to believe in an impossible success story. When everyone benefits from a rising valuation, the motivation to look closely at the underlying truth vanishes into thin air. That human tendency to choose comfort over hard facts remains a permanent risk in every high-stakes corporate investment. Today, venture capital contracts routinely include strict audit triggers and whistleblower protections that did not exist during the acquisition surge. Startup founders are held to rigorous financial reporting standards long before they ever reach the public market or seek an exit deal. This operational shift has made it much harder for paper unicorns to hide behind clever marketing campaigns and inflated user metrics. The disaster also fundamentally changed how corporate boards manage founder power and internal oversight. Independent directors are now required to maintain direct lines of communication with mid-level financial managers, bypassing executive gatekeepers entirely. This structural barrier helps ensure that internal warnings reach the top before small errors spiral into multi-billion-dollar accounting failures. Former staff members from both companies continue to navigate the lingering fallout of the $11 billion write-down. Background checks still flag employment dates tied to the deal, forcing workers to explain their roles in a historic corporate disaster. The administrative paper trail remains a permanent marker on thousands of individual resume histories, serving as a quiet reminder of a failed corporate marriage. Legal settlement funds and court restitution programs spent years untangling claims from impacted retail investors who lost money during the collapse. Hundreds of retirement portfolios suffered losses when stock prices plummeted following the initial write-down announcement. For these ordinary shareholders, the legal resolution brought formal answers, but it could never restore the lost financial security. In the end, the collapse of Autonomy stands as a stark monument to the dangerous space between corporate ambition and physical reality. It proved that no matter how complex the software, how famous the founder, or how large the valuation, a company built on paper numbers will eventually be forced to account for every single dollar. The story serves as a permanent warning to Silicon Valley that the math always wins in the end. The fallout from this $11.1 billion disaster permanently altered how global corporate acquisitions are negotiated, audited, and enforced. Boardrooms from London to Silicon Valley quickly abandoned the era of buying high-margin promises off shiny pitch decks and warm handshakes. The grueling, decade-long legal wars waged across London's High Court and American federal dockets established a far colder, more ruthless standard of due diligence. Independent forensic accountants now scrub every line item of revenue, verifying that reported software margins are not secretly padded with low-margin hardware resales or backdated channel-stuffing agreements before any ink touches a binding contract. Yet behind the tens of thousands of trial exhibits, forensic audits, and criminal indictments, one haunting question continues to loom over the entire collapse. It is the razor-thin border separating extreme entrepreneurial self-belief from deliberate, calculated fraud, a boundary that even unanimous court verdicts can never fully illuminate. Did executive leadership genuinely convince themselves that their inflated organic growth metrics were merely aggressive corporate positioning until the financial floor caved in? Or was every accounting trick a cold, deliberate gamble engineered solely to stay 1 quarter ahead of total institutional ruin? When a digital illusion is priced at $11 billion, human psychology exhibits a terrifying capacity to rationalize the absurd. High-powered board members, top-tier auditors, and opportunistic founders all wrapped themselves in the comfortable sanctuary of collective denial, willfully blinding themselves to obvious operational red flags. Fiduciary duty was quietly sacrificed on the altar of immediate incentive fees and explosive stock valuations. Systemic corporate failures on this scale are rarely built by criminal masterminds working alone. They require an entire ecosystem of sophisticated enablers who are simply too compromised or too terrified to state the obvious out loud. In the end, after the sensational fraud trials subside and the legal bills reach hundreds of millions of dollars, all that remains is a quiet room, a mountain of redacted filings, and a cautionary tale written into the law books. The grand vision of a self-learning software empire that was supposed to revolutionize enterprise data exists now only as an expensive footnote in corporate bankruptcy filings and civil judgments. It stands as a permanent reminder that in the hyper-leveraged world of elite technology finance, the grandest promises are often nothing more than vaporware wrapped in an audited financial statement.